Have you ever felt like you're constantly chasing impossible standards? No matter how hard you try, it's just not quite good enough. If so, you're not alone. Today, we're diving into the complex world of perfectionism. What drives it? Where does it come from? What's the price that we pay? And how do we break free? Hello and welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Bernice Casserly.
And me, James Cooper. It sounds very interesting to get into some of that detail and really deep dive it as well. Because there's obviously, for anybody that is listening to this now and thinking,
That's me.
That's me. Then what is it? Where can it come from? And we're not saying that it's definitely this and this is what you should be doing. But yeah, I think when it comes to, you can make links to professional values.
Yeah.
As just a headline, and it might be people considering what their professional values are.
Yes.
Well, it might be the first one to think of, well, you know what, I've got really high standards, Bernice, and that's me, and I really stick to that, and everybody else should be on that journey with me.
Yes.
When really, there's not that. Well, there's definitely people that are on that journey with you, but are they meeting the standard? Are they actually achieving the standard that you're expecting from them?
Yeah.
Or is it something else?
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the world of perfectionism, there certainly is some strengths that brings, but also as well, there's definitely a few hidden costs as well, whether that be from anxiety to strained relationships to micromanagement to potential burnout. So ultimately, the podcast today is an opportunity for anyone who's listening who does resonate with the fact that, you know what, I do have a need for continuous improvement and sometimes it's just not always good enough. Then this is hopefully going to be an opportunity for you to learn how to embrace a healthy level of perfectionism. So if we start off with then, before we even start to dig into some of the strategies or considerations that we need to make, we know at T2 that there's a lot of people, as just mentioned, who are motivated towards like this need for perfection. Where does that come from?
So start from the very beginning, even maybe some of the family environments that you've grown up in, and having a real detail in, right, what was being driven, what was the mentality towards doing things as you were growing up. We can call it the formative years.
Yeah.
And we can make reference to how was your house run?
Yeah.
So I know that my mum and dad and our family, we weren't necessarily, it had to be perfect, correct and right. And then is it as a coincidence that I'm not necessarily in that sort of same headspace?
Yeah.
So we can look at family and think about, well, what was it? Was it that your room had to be tidy?
Oh, yeah. And parental influence is definitely big for some people.
And then I think when you go to the next sort of natural stage, you can start to look at school. So if you think about, as well as just enjoying school life, there's an element of how do we navigate school?
Yeah.
So if we go to the fundamentals of what you received or what some people might not have received after leaving school. So if we talk about qualifications and talk about sort of assessments, well, how do we normally get, and this is the key bit, how do we get through an assessment? So you could talk about any stage of qualifications.
Yeah.
Well, normally you would have to answer a question and give an answer. Now, if that answer isn't what was prescribed from the get-go as being correct,
yes,
or the perfect answer, then
big red pen and a big there's a cross against that one. You got that one wrong.
And that's another thing for us to consider. So you've got your family, you've got education, where we have to go through assessment criteria and obviously examinations to gain qualifications.
And I think just to jump onto what you just said there, James, because it just sparked something in my brain. And I think this is something that Martin's mentioned in one of his books as well. But even just tying those two threads together. So that child, or for us as adults, when we were children and we got that kind of test paper back and it's got that little red mark against it. Apparently in some schools, they're not even allowed to use a red pen to mark anymore because red means bad. But then if you're my dad and I come home from school and you want to see my test report, let's say out of 10 questions, I've got 3 of them wrong. So often what happens is, as parents, we sometimes focus on, why did you get this wrong? And how come, why didn't you know that? You should know that answer. what have you done wrong there? And because of that focus, it starts to build this little thread for people. And there was one gentleman that I am working with, I've been working on and off in different formats, I suppose, for over 6 months now. And that person, we know through the work that we do at Print, which is a tool that helps you understand what your unconscious motivators are. This is a particular individual who is very much so motivated towards this need for perfection. And we were exploring, well, where does that come from? And for them, it was exactly as you just said, James. It was parental and educational, because they went to an all-boys boarding school, and because they didn't see their parents on a regular every day, so therefore when they wanted to ensure that when I see my mum and dad, I want them to be proud, and I want them to there not to be any negativity, and I want them to know that I've been a good boy. And also as well, the environment that they were in at a very traditional all-boys school, there were severe consequences if you did something wrong. That's it. And they were able to make that connection to, I know that 60 years down the line, that is a big influence over why I am the way that I am and why I am such a perfectionist now.
And then I think obviously great points, and these can come from anywhere within those sort of formative years, if you think about it, and even maybe running a little bit deeper of who you are, the standards that you set. There's so many different blends of different ways and different wheres it comes from.
Yes.
It's just about you making that link for yourself. And,
yes.
And what are the varying levels of perfectionism that you might have.
And I think with just looking at like experience and influence as well, social media, I think. Yeah. So we've highlighted parental, educational, but tying into the social, I think that's completely changed things. And it'll be interesting to see in 20, 30 years' time, would it go higher? Just because of the impact of social media and people seeing an image or this kind of potential lifestyle that they think, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Why have I not got that? And that's then when it can, I think, grow even stronger for some people.
Yeah, I think everybody wants that beach in Bali lifestyle, but then for some people, that's not realistic.
No.
If it is that's not realistic for you, well, first of all, what's holding you back? Is it that is there something else going on there? But have we got that drive and that motivation to not drop the standard?
Yes.
And obviously, everybody wants that. Everybody would want that chilled out life, but it's not realistic, is it?
No.
So when we start to look at that then, and again, so you've got school, you've got family, you've got friendship groups, social circles, then when we start to look at the people that we work with, and the key thing being work with, is what have you done from your sort of career-wise? Has it been that you've been in, and without being too generic, have you been in roles where you have needed to sit in spreadsheets for a prolonged period of time, or have you been out in the wilderness running around with a football at your feet, which is what I was doing?
Yes.
And is it then a coincidence that I hate being behind a spreadsheet?
Yeah.
But understanding that from a careers perspective, what is it that you've done? What are the environments that you've worked in that have then led you to where you are today? And when we talk about this big blend of people that are in those environments and that moulding themselves into the beautiful people we have in front of us today, what does that look like? What does it look like for you? And is there something else we need to consider, or maybe just reflect on a little bit?
Yeah.
And take some time to actually process it and get into the detail around that.
Yeah, I think, absolutely spot on that. All of these different experiences that you can sometimes go through in life, whether it be from childhood or whether it be through your career, can certainly have an impact on that person's need for things just being right or high standards or just that forever dream and chase of that world of perfection. And I think even some of that ties into, at times, just your core sense of being and your core sense of purpose. Because there's a few elements that we explore here at T2 with people, mainly on a one-to-one basis, but also within a workshop setting as well. But when it comes to sense of purpose, James, what might be a connection to this need for perfection for people?
Well, I suppose it can come from all elements of sense of purpose. Because imagine if it was from that, and let's just find the thread between it now. So if, for example, you can recognise that your perfectionism comes from parents, okay? Then, so the element of being a perfectionist and having that detail and knowing that your standards don't drop, well, is that because your sense of purpose actually is to prove someone right, to prove someone wrong, to prove a point, to achieve recognition or goals, or even honours?
Yeah.
So if I'm in a situation where I've had all this pressure put on me, my sense of purpose is now heavily focused on proving someone right.
Yeah.
Well, is it the standards of that person that you are trying to prove right? They are so high, and they are perfectionist by their own account. But that's the reason why you do things the way that you do them.
Yes.
Is that where it really comes from?
Yeah.
And you can make links to school, because she was always on time for school, if not 45 minutes earlier. And you was reading books. You made sure you read the book that you said you was going to read. You've been impeccable with your word.
Yeah.
And that's when you say you're going to do something now professionally, you know, and everybody in your organisation or service knows that you're going to do it, because you've set yourself a standard from day one. And it's not a coincidence. It's because it's based on fundamentally where your sense of purpose comes from.
Yes. Yeah. Spot on. And I think as well with that need to prove something, there was just, it was in a workshop recently, and it was someone who was able to recognise that they are someone who definitely shares this need for things to be perfect around them. And for them, their connection was that it's like that need to prove a point, because it was one person when they were a teenager said one thing to them, and it was only until this moment in time when we're sat in this workshop talking about all of this that they realised, oh my goodness, that's where it's come from for me. It's that need to prove that I am going to be able to make a good life of myself. And that for them was where this drive for perfectionism came from.
Yeah, and I think like I say, you could make the link to the thread across all of the different paths that we've just laid out.
Yeah.
So it's not as if it's just one way suits.
No.
It is for you. You've got different elements of different parts of your life.
Yeah.
I've met people that have been through horrendous upbringings, and that's why they're really harsh on their kids now.
Yeah.
Because they don't want, or I say harsh, I set strict and standard and high standards.
Yeah.
Because that's the way that they would never ever want their children to go through what they've been through.
Yeah.
So is it that's really driving that? No, as a family, it's the family name. This is what the standards we set, and if you drop below them, you will hear about it very loud and very clear.
Because some people, as well as we know, it comes from a place of avoidance or even fear as well. The amount of people that we work with who have such a deep-rooted fear of failure, or even fear of making a mistake or something being wrong. And that's where we get into real kind of quite deep and meaningful. But for some people listening to this, it might be that actually, my gosh, I think the reason why I am a perfectionist is because I just something going wrong, or a mistake, or even a failure just feels awful to me.
So then it's to avoid failure, to avoid,
and that's
struggle.
where it comes from.
Yeah.
And
then obviously, if you start to create your own families and you're starting to have environments where you're having to support other people. So is it that need to provide? I want to provide for people. I want to make sure that my family never struggle the way that I did. And that's where it comes from. I'm going to provide all of this information. I'm going to make sure that my family doesn't have the worst shoes in the school, or they've got a warm jacket, or whatever it is. And even to your own sort of detriment, if you like. Some people will go above and beyond for others, and that's the point. But from a standards perspective and a perfectionism perspective, what is it that we might need to consider then? Well, for us and for each person individually, it would be totally different. That's what we're saying, but yes, right?
Yeah. And I think also as well, before we start really digging into some of the positives of perfectionism and some of the challenges, let's say, I think finally it's important to recognise as well that it's part of our DNA. And I think this kind of rise of perfectionism has always been there, because I think it's just part of our human nature. Because look back thousands and thousands of years ago, of course the world was very different. We didn't have all of these amazing images on Instagram and these fantastic videos that make us think, oh my goodness, why does my life not look like that? We all have a level of perfectionism. I think it's just a key word that I said there. It's the levels that differ. For some people it's a deep-rooted motivation. For some people it's a It's a need, but it doesn't take over.
Yeah. It's the varying level for you, and can you find the links of where it might have been? So if it's from a time management point of view,
Yes.
what might that look like? What does it look like for you? What does it feel like as well? And then is there a reason why?
Yeah.
And then is it sort of deeper rooted into your sort of sense of purpose?
And I think for most of us, it is somewhere.
Mm.
Comes from somewhere. So if we start to then just dig into, I suppose, the benefits then.
Okay.
So what would you say are some of the benefits or values that a perfectionist might bring?
If I'm looking at somebody that's getting very precise, detailed, there's a reason for that. It's because they want you to understand all of that detail and making sure that you're understanding exactly what they're saying and the way they're saying it. And they might even slow down slightly. And to understand that their standards are to meet results. So one of the pros of having this perfectionist really drive, if you like, and why it can be such a benefit, is that those results are the top of top standards.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
you are hitting those on a more than regular basis.
Consistently.
And imagine if you threw in innovation into that.
Yes.
And you had somebody that had the highest of standards and they were in charge of innovation.
Yes.
What would you get from that? Well, it's a drive, isn't it?
That's it. Because this is someone who, it's like potentially for them, it's a deep-rooted need to strive for quality and high standards. But fantastic, because it means in the right environment, they're able to spot something that maybe isn't quite right or could just be better than what it currently is. And they can go on that quest and that journey in order to make it the best it can be.
From an achievement point of view, it is obviously those high achievements.
Yeah.
So, or high achieving people where you're thinking, you know what? It's not the be all and end all, by the way. But imagine if you've got somebody that's driving those really high standards, has that perfectionism as a natural thing for them, and they've made the link to where it comes from. And now when they're on their best and in their best days, they are achieving those high standards. And that's what driving the organisation you work with or the team you work within forward.
Yeah.
Because it's not just going to be them. You're going to be bringing other people on the journey with them. My interest is more on the other side, though, Bernice.
Because there is another side to this. And I suppose even just thinking about what was mentioned at the very start of this podcast, that sometimes that need for things being right or just correct or just perfect, it can really feel like you're just constantly chasing your tail. It feels as though it's like you're forever striving for impossible standards, or sometimes it just feels like no matter what you do, it's just you never feel like it's quite good enough. And that's not only can be with others, but can also be personal as well. So there definitely is a challenge if we are too much of a perfectionist.
Now, I'm going to take this challenge for perfectionism to the point of burnout. And now I don't know if you've experienced burnout, Bernice, but it's not fun. It's not fun at all.
No.
And there is no amount of money that's going to get me back to burnout.
Yeah. If you think of that just continuous drive for kind of chasing that dream or whatever it might be. Sometimes for some people, it's what can lead them to that point it's the anxiety. And thinking about anxiety is almost like the fear of the unknown about the future. And that can sometimes just cause that person to really kind of have a bit of a challenge in reaching for that perfect goal.
Yeah, I think there's an element of this. I think of some of the challenges around and having experienced burnout and the stress of trying to really push the standard of people that are not necessarily on the same wavelength as me. There is that being able to switch off element.
Yes.
Finding it very difficult to switch off when you've been given the time and space to be able to do so and you still can't switch off.
Yeah, and it can be exhausting and just really stressful because it's that continuous push for improvement and it's always jumping and moving to the next thing and never just pausing just to actually appreciate what's happened and what we have achieved.
Yeah, and I think, and obviously being overly self-critical is probably the next sort of stage of that, or maybe even be the start and the catalyst of it. When perfectionists in their best self or at their best, then it can obviously have big impacts on not just them as individuals and their mental health, but if you think about that creativity element that would be so good when they're at the best and when they're getting everything that they need and being able to achieve things. And that's great that we can see that from them. But then when you flip that coin and think about the person that's still really not admitting their mistakes and then going over and over in their head, being self-critical, and then all of a sudden, have you got any ideas on this? And they go, no, I haven't. And because I'm not committing to anything now.
Yes.
Because I know that you've dropped your standards and now that made me look bad. Or whatever the environment is.
Yeah.
But again, that fear of failure, reduced levels of creativity can all be knock-on effects of these perfectionists not being in the best spot, or actually being overly perfectionist. And I haven't worked with luckily enough there is nobody at T2 that is overly perfectionistic.
Yeah.
But there is an element of working with people in the past and in other careers and other business ventures where it's not been very much fun at all. Not even just from my perspective, but as a interpersonal professional relationship, I've gone, oh wow.
Because it's a case of actually, how do other people perceive you? Because you might have that belief that I am someone who is a catalyst of change. I can really help drive improvements within the team, within my organization. And we're kind of forever chasing this vision. And that's really exciting because, yeah, it's great for the business. It's great for the organization. However, how do other people perceive that? Because what do they see from you? Does it make people feel as though they're being micromanaged? Does it make people feel as though they're never good enough? Because we're forever chasing it to be perfect or to be right. And also as well, if you have your view on what's right and someone else comes along and says, oh, well, I'm looking at it from this perspective, but we're focused on the target and what we're trying to achieve here, how do I respond to that?
What do you think, from a trust perspective, someone being overly perfectionistic, what impacts could that have on a team when I'm the one that's driving the stance? I'm not letting it drop. I'm being that person that is really suggesting that I don't necessarily trust the work that you're doing. What impact could that have on the team?
I can massively disengage people because, yeah, as you said, it's a case of that person doesn't feel as though they're good enough, or they don't feel as though they're trusted or can be reliable, or for some people it will make them doubt how capable and competent they are in their role. And the reality is some people leave jobs because that's exactly how they feel.
Yeah.
People can feel as though they're just forever being judged. People can sometimes take a seat back because it's a case of, I've made a mistake and I'm not going to talk about it. And I'm actually going to conceal that mistake because I don't feel as though it's safe to talk to you about it.
Okay. Now, I feel a bit glum. I feel a bit is like we've just sat the energy out of this room.
And the challenge.
I don't like this at all. So what are we going to do next then, Bernice? What can we do? What are the considerations to embrace a healthy level?
That's it, because it's a fantastic trait and quality. I wish I was a bit more of a perfectionist. I think I would probably get a lot more done. But yeah, as you say, is about embracing that healthy level. So how do we strive for excellence whilst also accepting that there's going to be imperfections along the way? I think firstly, the first thing to tune in and focus on is, I think, your mindset and actually how you just view the world.
Yeah, I think understanding yourself is really quite important when we're starting to think about healthy levels of anything.
Yes, and recognising as well. So if you know TT, you'll know that we're huge fans and supporters of the work that Steve Peters has done on the chimp paradox. So even just checking in on that internal narrative for some people, if you forever live in a world where your chimp is telling you that something's not good enough, or it's not right, or you're not going to meet that standard, that's your chimp talking. That's not always using logic and rationale. So sometimes just recognising that internal narrative, and it's your responsibility to challenge your chimp and ask questions. And sometimes befriend it and support it. But there's a concept that we talk to people about all the time at T2, especially when it comes to those people who have that vision of the flag on the hill and this is what we're trying to achieve. James, you're smiling at me. What are we talking about?
We're talking about embracing optimal performance.
Yes.
Are you able to do the best that you can with what you've got in the moment, in the time frames that you have, with the skill sets you've got, and the challenges that you're being faced with? What does good look like?
Yeah.
Now, think about that. There's two elements, and we need to talk about this, but understanding that we're considering perfectionism within it. So anybody that's thinking, you know what, I have got quite a lot of perfectionism in my day-to-day runnings of work, and I have to, from a legal point of view, the standards have to be met. Okay, well, when you have a good day, we're going to call that a little bit of flow.
Yes.
So you've got that little bit of that higher peak, if you like, and going, you know what, I've had a great day, I've smashed it, thank you.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Quality, ting, 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 ting.
And then how long do you celebrate that for? How long do you stay up on that upper curve? And then you can start to consider what we allude to as drudgery. So the days when things are potentially substandard.
Yeah.
And you are not necessarily...
You're not winning.
You're not doing the best. And the standards have dropped and your performance has dipped. But you are still on that sort of ebb and flow, if you like, of good and bad days, and understanding that you're going to have some more challenging days, times, meetings. Now, when we talk about embracing optimal performance from a perfectionist perspective, what are the key things that we need to consider then?
So I think it's recognizing that life is like a roller coaster at times, and there is going to be kind of peaks and troughs. Perfect doesn't exist in today's world, and we need to almost really check in. And yeah, we can certainly strive for excellence, but the world that we live in isn't perfect. So knowing that sometimes just good is enough. Nothing and not everything has to be shiny and perfect, because that's not always achievable. Sometimes, as you said, James, we just need to dig in, do our best, and recognise that, yeah, we could have done better, but we've just done our best based on the time that we had and the resources that we were given.
All right, I'm going to come back to those little wins again.
Yeah.
And I think it is important for, especially when you are in this really quite stressful environment. I call it the pressure cooker. If you're in the pressure cooker and and this is when there's a lot of stress, your decisions are being judged, people are being overly critical of you, and then you in turn, like we mentioned earlier, could be quite critical of yourself.
Yeah.
Well, hold on a minute. Let's celebrate the little wins and just remind ourselves of, remember, we did do this. We have achieved this before. We did meet the standard. All right, it wasn't perfection, but that was the standard that got us over the line. That was what we needed to try and achieve. Let's do that again. And for some people, that might just be the little kick out of the more challenging days, or actually into the more positive work, balance, decision, discernment, whatever you want to call it. If you are known for being the perfectionist, and people see you going, yeah, that's fine, let's move on. This is the mistake, we've learned from this, let's get on with the next one. And I think the learning moments are quite important.
Yes.
Because if you can learn from, or take these lacks in perfection as learning moments.
Yeah. Mistakes are sometimes good. Sometimes that little bit of failure opens up a door that we never would have even seen if it wasn't for that mistake or that one thing that went wrong. And it's embracing that and learning, actually, how can I find a way in order to fail forwards? It's not about dwelling on, oh, well, I knew that wasn't going to work, and I told you this is what you should have done, and look what's happened now. It's not about that. It's a case of, actually, what can we learn from this, and how do we use this information to drive us forward?
And I think if you then went to what are you aiming for and driving forward, well, what are you driving forward to?
Yes.
And just thinking about the realistic goals that we are setting ourselves and the teams that are around us, or even the organisation we work for. If you're in a situation where you're going, right, what are the actual goals that we are trying to set? What's realistic to us? And that optimum performance, if you like, where we go, this is what we're actually going to try and achieve. If we get to Mars, brilliant. But if we can get somewhere
definitely
near a different, maybe the moon, let's try and then get to, let's just get to America. That'd be quite good. Let's not push it too far. We don't want to be getting on a jet just...
Yeah, but I think the key word that you just used there that people need to focus on there, James, is realistic. because that's exactly it. For some individuals, for some of us, that kind of focus and drive for things being perfect isn't always realistic. And again, coming back to optimal performance, it's all about doing the very best with the time that you have, with the resources that you have, the skills and the knowledge and so on. So actually, this strive for perfection or improvement, is it even realistic for us to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z?
So it's not just a challenge of pessimism. It's actually those negative thoughts and going back to your point about the chip and saying, right, look, is this actually what's going on? Is this actually the situation that I'm in? Or is it just me having a little bit of a freak out in the moment? And if it is that, then that's fine. But let's just, first of all, accept or acknowledge that that's the process.
Yeah.
And then start to take a little bit of control of our reactions.
Yeah.
And again, rewording that email and going, this standard isn't good enough, and running off and then potentially upsetting people.
Yes.
Sometimes it might just be that I'm going to challenge my own negative thoughts. Then I'm going to word this, because remember, people can see you.
Yes.
People can read your email. People can hear you in the office when you're going crazy. But understanding that you do need to have that challenge with your negative thoughts.
Yeah, because if that email comes through and something's gone wrong, that's a potential trigger point for you. So it's a case of, how are you going to acknowledge that? How are you going to check in with yourself? And how are you going to focus on ensuring that you still show up positively and productively? Because if that's a trigger point for you, the likelihood is that this is where you might become skeptical or be seen as judgmental or be seen as overly critical. So actually, how do I reverse that so it doesn't have a negative impact on other people around me?
I think creating environments where you are able to put your feelings out there. Yeah. Everybody has a soundboard, right?
Yes.
And I think even if it is that you are allowing them to actually even react to an idea, that's fine. We might not be going through with it exactly how you thought it was going to go, but I am going to actually have that conversation. I'm going to allow the time for me and you to have this discussion. I'm going to take on board your ideas and then come up with a plan.
Yes.
Of what we're actually going to do.
Yeah, because that's really important. If you know that I'm someone who is a perfectionist, you know that if you've got an idea that goes against my initial kind of thought process, yes, you need to have that conversation with me. But knowing that I am a perfectionist, that's your opportunity to think, right, okay, how do I give a bit of time to process and think through this alternative idea and view?
Yeah, and I think there's that. We obviously mentioned about mistake making, but correct them. Let's have that conversation. Say, look, these are the mistakes that if we are seeing lots of mistakes going on, we can't just ignore those. So they could be detrimental. And they see that healthy level needs to be right.
Yes.
If I'm just correcting absolutely everything it doesn't necessarily land very well. Well, hold on a minute.
Yeah, we need to recognise what went wrong or where it went wrong, but it's not me pointing fingers saying, oh, James, it's all your fault. Why did you do this? It's a case of, right, okay, facts. This is what happened. What do we need to do differently next time? Yeah.
And there's an element of staying present in the actual situation itself. I'm actually going, right, what are the things that I can control in the moments in these environments?
Yes.
And then what's potentially going to serve me best? And there's another question you might want to ask there. What does good look like?
Yes.
And we mentioned it right at the very beginning. If you're asking yourself the question going, am I being a little bit too much at the moment, or am I not being enough? What does good look like? From an advice point of view and the considerations of embracing healthy levels of perfectionism, well, what is it that gets you to the good level for you?
That's it.
Then for your teams, then for the people that you work with and the wider audience, if you like.
Yeah.
It's quite funny when working with people that have a totally different perspective on life and they are nowhere near a perfectionist. But there's one thing that they'd say, and I've taken some of the golden threads, if you like, and taken that nugget of information and said, I could actually do something with that. And it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't meant to be. It was never planned to be perfect. But what it was that eureka moment where things happened and it didn't necessarily need to be perfect. So embrace that little bit of chaos as well.
Yeah, and recognise the value that other people bring.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding that actually, I am that person who can see and spot things very clearly. That's the right way of doing it and that's the wrong way. Simple as. But then you've got that person that you work with and they look at the world from a very different lens. Embrace that value, because sometimes it's good to take risks and find a little bit of chaos at times and recognize the value that they're bringing. And it's about finding that balance and meeting in the middle.
So if we was going to summarise the sort of takeaways from today's podcast, then, Bernice, I think from the start we'd be looking at the whys, right?
And that's that opportunity to really almost kind of reflect and look inwards. But from doing that, that's then when we need to think about, well, based on that, what does that mean to me and how does that project outwards and portray and show up to other human beings? Because it does have an impact on other people. It's embracing, recognizing that is so valuable that we have people in the world who have this level of perfectionism. But sometimes it's about just pausing, letting go of the control and accepting that you can't control absolutely everything that happens in life. And there's always going to be situations where things don't go to plan. And we need to just pause, enjoy the process and focus on the journey that we're on to the achievement of that task, goal, activity, whatever it might be. We're all human. Life isn't perfect. There's nothing in this world that is perfect. So yes, we can try and make it so, but the reality is that with the world that we live in, it's never going to be perfect. And let's embrace that and recognize we're all human and we all make mistakes. We all fail sometimes, but sometimes that's the beauty of life itself.
Second of all, the impact. So both pros and some of those positives and some of the negatives, or challenges, if we like to say.
Yeah, and how do you respond, and how does this show up for you, and how you not only feel about yourself, but how you engage with other humans as well.
And then finally, taking into consideration that there is a sweet spot for
Yes.
you and another person, another individual within an organisation. Those are your considerations. Take your time. Don't stress yourself out too much. Even though your brain, and sometimes, again, the chimp might be making links to some of those emotions and feelings, but for you, understand your process, enjoy the journey, and just remember there's another person you're speaking to. It's not just about what's going on in your head, it's about what's going on in somebody else's head as well.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you ever so much, James, for joining me today.
Thank you, Bernice.
And we'll be back soon for another Pupil Performance podcast.
Yeah, brilliant. See you soon, guys.